tear, it falls and hits the ground. A tree, it falls without a sound. A bird, it calls and sends you home. A man, he sits in the cold all alone.
Hi, welcome to The Joy of Sunflowers. It's so great to have you on. Please introduce yourself and tell us your story.
Hi, my name is Jenna Sheedy. I am from the Boston area in Massachusetts, USA, and I have been struggling with infertility now for about 3 years. So at the age of 35, I noticed some perimenopausal symptoms, some hot flashes, some just signs that I wasn't quite sure where I would be at in my fertility journey were I to try to have children. So I was single at the time and started just getting some more information from doctors and people that I knew. And because I got my period very young, I was 8. I also thought that that might be an indicator that maybe I would have difficulty if it went too many more years down the road. And so I started pursuing information about egg freezing. At the same time, I started dating my current husband, but I went forward with the first cycle of egg freezing. So my first egg retrieval with Mass General Hospital in Boston. So I kind of researched a great center and a great doctor. And I was on just a normal antagonist protocol. And that protocol, unfortunately and very surprisingly, only resulted in 3 eggs retrieved. And so that was devastating because it was kind of like all of my savings put into this. And I was naive at the time into just thinking it would work, or at least I would get some number that would be more than 3. And so we froze those 3. And then I kind of waited. That was 2019. So then I started dating my husband. I tried to wait a little bit to see what would happen in the relationship. And then COVID hit as well. So I figured, anyway, it's COVID. We're all in lockdown. And so I might as well just see where the relationship goes. And then in 2021, around kind of the spring and the summer, I decided that, I wanted to first, in the winter, I started getting my health in order. So I was really focused on fitness and nutrition and just optimizing my health for my body and for my eggs, for my egg quality, knowing that at some point in that summer, I wanted to either do another egg retrieval or make embryos with my boyfriend if he turned into my fiance. And we decided that was the route that we wanted to go. So July was when my second retrieval was happening. I had done the 6 months of like really intense work. So no sugar, no gluten, no dairy, no alcohol, like just really eating clean and healthy. And he actually proposed to me on the 4th of July, which was the day of my trigger shot. So it was an hour after the trigger shot, he proposed. And then we had the retrieval 2 days later. And unfortunately, that retrieval only resulted in 2 eggs. So between the 2 eggs that I got in that second retrieval and the 3 that were frozen, we had 5. 3 of those eggs fertilized and none of them made it to blast. And that was devastating for me. I think realizing that not only did I not have a lot of eggs, but like we couldn't even get them to this point that we were supposed to be at. And at the time, we weren't even necessarily wanting to have children right away. We wanted to kind of bank embryos. Another factor that we discovered before we got engaged was that my husband has male factor infertility as well. So we weren't sure exactly what that entailed until they did a double testicular biopsy in April. So the April before we did the retrieval, and we weren't even sure if there was sperm. So if he was able to have children. We found out he has no vas deferens. So that's also why there's actually no ejaculation. So it's great when people are like, oh, when you least expect it, it'll happen. And for me, it's physically impossible that it'll happen. So it's just the thing that people always say, like, oh, my friend, everyone knows someone, and I know people that at, 42, when they stopped trying, it just magically happened after rounds of failed IVF. But for us, that was apparent that that's just not a thing. And so we actually never have tried to get pregnant. So that's something that I've also had to grieve, like not like we went from engagement to like automatically full on into IVF, knowing I had some sort of diminished ovarian reserve and knowing that he couldn't naturally get me pregnant. We kind of had no time. And so basically our whole marriage has been cycle after cycle of IVF. He sometimes says that it's like having a pregnant wife who's never pregnant, right? I've been on like some sort of hormones and some sort of ups and downs, from his perspective of just like you're walking on eggshells with this hormonal, emotional woman. And that's been basically our entire marriage. So we're dealing with male factor and my diminished ovarian reserve. So I think after that failed attempt at making embryos, I really took a little bit of a step back. We got married. So we got married that summer, like did a little COVID ceremony. And then a year later, this past September, we had our bigger wedding. But we waited until February actually of 2022 to do our next cycle. So I again worked on I let myself go for a couple months. I was grieving and kind of like, I don't want to deal with this. I just want to like enjoy the summer. And then there's the guilt of having let yourself go. And so then I got back into doing all the healthier things to try to get my egg quality going and all the supplements. And I do acupuncture. I've been doing acupuncture for almost 2 years now. So I definitely was trying to do everything I could think of. But I think I was in a pretty negative headspace as well at the time. I think it starts becoming all consuming. And that's where I was February of last year. And so I did my third egg retrieval with Mass General. So my second was a microflare Luprin protocol, which is often something that works better for poor responders, which is what they considered me after my first retrieval. And that still resulted in only 2 eggs. So we went back to an antagonist protocol with I think we did some estrogen patch priming ahead of time. And that retrieval also resulted only in 2 eggs. So by that time I realized I don't think that Mass General is the place for me. I think I felt like it was like a factory for IVF. Like there was just so many doctors and so many people coming in and out that my case wasn't able to be a little bit like out of the box, where we could actually come up with some solutions and maybe some protocols that would add things in that could potentially help get to better results. Because my follicle count was always much better than what we were retrieving. So I didn't have amazing numbers, but I always had 15 to 20 follicles. So it would seem that at least, 10 or so eggs should be able to be retrieved. And then we just weren't getting anywhere. So I decided to change clinics. And February was when I created my Instagram account. So that definitely, I don't know, somehow before I had never even considered social media, like looking into social media for infertility. So I went through the first 2 cycles completely on my own without even like looking up information, or it's just so interesting to me now because it's such a part of my world that I didn't even think about it before. And really the reason I started the account was because I had met in talking to other people, like in the real world, because I'm a very open and vulnerable person, I end up talking to the woman who's the esthetician who's waxing me and like the hairdresser, just whoever. And then people start sharing their stories and you realize wow, there's a lot of us that are going through this. And at the same time, I was struggling a lot in my faith. So I come from a Christian background. I believe in God. And so my faith was something that I wanted it to be getting me through. And I wanted to share that because when I started having really bad results and the terrible things that are happening, there's that moment where you're just on the floor and you're convulsing and you're just so emotional. And to think I had my faith that was kind of getting me through, but I was hanging on by a thread. So I was I don't know how people do this without having a community, and so I started the account because I wanted to be able to share my journey and share my faith and share the very real ups and downs and be raw. And I didn't think I could do that. I've had my normal social media accounts for many, many years, and I have clients and friends and just people that I wouldn't necessarily want to be sharing some of this stuff with. And so it felt safe. It felt like a safe thing to do. And it's become a lifeline. I think also just being able to use that to get support, to talk to people through all the different things going on. A lot of what I've done for my protocols have come out of things that I've talked to people about. You get just such a bigger community of like, that's why we need events like this. And that's why we need each other. It's because we learn from real people. The Google like trap of just going down the rabbit hole can lead you to so many places that aren't even productive. But when you talk to real people who've had similar situations, you can troubleshoot a little bit. And I found that incredibly helpful. And so actually I was in a community of like women in Boston going through IVF. Someone saw me on Instagram, was like, oh, you're from Boston. There's a chat with like a group of us that are going through IVF in Boston. I'll add you to it. And in there, and as I was doing research on other clinics, I found a doctor in a clinic I was interested in. And the women in that chat were like, half of them had switched to my doctor from either where I was or other places around that I had also considered. And so, and they were singing my doctor's praises, and they were really having a lot of positive input. And so that's how I picked my clinic.
Yeah.
And so then I switched, and I have not looked back. The admin at my clinic is a little bit crazy and difficult. I miss Mass General for that for sure, but there's only 3 doctors. And so I find it much better because they all know all the cases, and I've had now retrievals with all 3 of them, but they're all wonderful. And the likelihood of getting your doctor is a lot higher when there's 3 as opposed to 10, which is what the situation was before. I never saw my doctor in the 3 retrievals that I had. Whereas I'll have my doctor come in for like an ultrasound now, like if he's on call, he'll just step in and then I get to see him and talk to him in person, which is just a nice thing when you're just so anxious about how things are going and wanting some reassurance. And so that's what we did. We switched, and then that was February. And so April was my first cycle with CCRM. And we changed some things up for my protocol. The other thing that I noticed, I had a call with this doctor, my current doctor, Dr. Steyer at CCRM. I had a call with him, and then I had a call with another doctor at another hospital in Boston. So also like very renowned clinic, very well-rated doctor. And she had gone through my whole file, but it was a hospital that's connected to Mass General. So she also knew my doctor. And of the 2 of them, one was basically like, this is just your genetics. This is just the way it is. You've got all these dreams of genetic testing and banking embryos, but that's just not your situation. You should just transfer a day 3 embryo. Like she just was kind of like, I'm sorry, I'm not going to give you Disney World, which is what it sounds like you want. I'm giving you reality, and this is what you have to deal with. And that was really depressing for me. And when I talked to Dr. Dyer, his perspective was, obviously you have some diminished ovarian reserve. Like that's clear from the results that we have. We can't promise or imagine you would get like 20 or 30 eggs or something like the numbers that you see sometimes. But I think we can do better. I think we can get even 8 or 9, like even if we get a little bit more, I think there's potential here to do better. There's things we can try. Hope is not lost. And so I felt hopeful for the first time in a really long time. Like there are things we can try. I'm not done. Like I've only had 3 cycles. I haven't tried that much in terms of protocols. There's a lot of things I've been reading about that other people are doing I haven't even heard of. And so that was when my CCRM journey started. And my first cycle, we did some estrogen priming. And then we ended up adding into just the normal gonal and menopur. We added in dexamethasone and Clomid to help like my brain react with my follicles to get more follicles growing, and it worked. So I was having my follicles were growing quickly, but I had more follicles growing than I've ever had. And so we actually ended up retrieving 12 eggs. So when you've got 3, 2, and 2, all of a sudden getting 12, and all 12 were mature, and 11 of them fertilized. So it was the first time in my, the whole process where every appointment I wasn't leaving sobbing because I was so disappointed. Like I was crying happy tears, and I was just looking forward to the retrieval. And 11 fertilized eggs was a really good number for me. I got 3 blasts from that. And out of the 3, none of them were normal. And so that was really hard because I think I was so convinced that this has got to work. This time it'll work. And it didn't. But it was just like, okay, well, something worked more than what we'd done before. And then for our second cycle, which was this past July, I also did a bunch of different things. I started the egg quality diet. So I got a little bit more specific and like upping my high healthy fat content. So I eat a crazy ton of avocado and ghee and coconut and whatever I can get that is a healthier fat, and a lot of protein. And then all, like grass fed, wild caught, like just really high quality food. My husband calls it the expensive diet.
Yes.
Because it's drinking bone broth like a crazy person, and all the supplements and things. I also, this is kind of funny. I was in Europe for work for 3 weeks of the prep time in May, and I was actually visiting in Poland with a Ukrainian woman from our church who is she's a refugee. She's from Odessa, so she was in Warsaw, and she went through IVF, and she swore that the thing she thinks helped her last cycle of IVF work was leech therapy. So in Ukraine, it's a very common, in Russia, it's this very common thing. Yeah, actual leeches. And so at that point, I'm like, I'll try anything. Like, sure, let's go find some leech therapy. So that's what we did. So in Warsaw and for Germany, I actually did 2 sessions of leech therapy in May while I was away before. So who knows if that helped, but I was like, I think that's just a testament to how we literally will try anything if we think it can help us get closer.
Yeah.
Maybe it's that motherly thing in us. It's like anything it takes, anything I have to do. You want to suck my blood, little leeches? Sure. If that's going to help me, then I will try it. I'll try anything.
Yeah.
So that was an interesting part of my, and I'm on a work trip too. So I was like going away, and then I've got like bandages, and I'm like going through leech therapy while I'm like in and out of work meetings.
Oh, no.
So that was an interesting experience. But the funny thing is, so we did the cycle, we swapped letrozole instead of Clomid for that cycle. So we kept everything else the same. And my follicles grew at a slower rate, and there was less of them. So we ended up with 10 eggs, and 7 were mature. And we got 2 embryos. And out of those 2 embryos, one of them was normal. So we got 1 normal and 1 inconclusive. So it was the first time in 5 cycles, that and all those cycles before that I got good news that we actually had something that was usable. And so that was also, you're not used to having good news. That's like that feeling that like there's the crying of relief that like I just don't know how much more I can take if it doesn't go well. So just the fact that there's this one chance and that it can work, right? I could keep doing more cycles as long as I knew it was possible to get a normal embryo, because when you keep going and going and going and you have nothing to show for it, you start questioning, like, should I keep doing this? Is it even possible? Am I crazy to like keep trying? How much more can I? And then people ask you, how many more, times you're going to do this. But now that we got one, I know it's possible. And so it makes it easier to like keep going. And so then we took a break. We had our big wedding in Italy in September. We had our honeymoon. We did like all the things. I definitely was like probably the most stressed I've ever been between like wedding planning and planning a destination wedding with a bunch of Americans during a pandemic was not, while going through IVF was just also very challenging. And I think IVF consumed so much of my life that I really didn't get to dedicate to the wedding stuff until it was like done. But that was also like a month and a half before the wedding. And so I had a lot of crunch time. And so I wonder if between the stress and the travel and I wasn't eating before the wedding because I was stressed. And then by the time the wedding happened, I was in Italy and eating everything I could find and all the pasta and all of the wine. And so then we came back and we went right into our 6th cycle. And and we did the same exact thing as we had done the one before because it worked. And so we just kept it the same with letrozole. And unfortunately, we did not have a great cycle. So that just happened this past month. We got 7 eggs, only 4 were mature, only 2 fertilized, and neither of them made it to blast. So that was a couple of weeks ago, and that was really sad. That was really hard. I think when you go through this so many times, you just kind of learn how to pick yourself up and keep going. I think having the community and knowing I'm not alone and talking to so many women helps. I also think some people have a really hard time seeing other people have good news.
Mm.
It really helped me, because it helps give me perspective, because for all of the tragedies that so many of us go through, like there's just so much loss. Seeing the miracles and the good stories come out of it, that it can work, that it does work, it kind of keeps me going in a way. Like it helps the perspective of like, there's people who've gone through a lot worse than me, and there's people that have made it and have gotten the miracles, and the dreams do come true. So I'm just kind of in the middle of it, and that helps keep going. And I guess I assume I'll know when it's ready to stop, when I'm ready to stop, or when it's time. So right now, because my clinic, it's also crazy expensive to do IVF so many times. And we had finally reached, there's so many out-of-pocket costs that go into this. There's so much invested. With our insurance, we finally reached our crazy out-of-pocket and our crazy deductible costs. And so I was like, great, we could do one more cycle this year to try to save a little bit of money. And then I found out that the clinic is closed for 2 weeks at Christmas. And so, and that would just be, it's like when I would have to do it. And so we decided to wait. And instead of doing it in January, I'm actually going to wait till February. I'm traveling in March anyway. And so the thought was I would have March as a month off. I could do February and then April, but I'm going to spend, because who knows if the diets help, who knows what really will do it. And if it's not just like a freak thing that like, I got the one normal embryo and I don't know why that happened, but I do know there's an immense amount of guilt I felt this last time, and the questioning, like, is it because I was too stressed, or I wasn't sleeping, or because of what I was eating, I wasn't on the egg quality diet. And again, I don't really know what the reasons were, but I do know that I already put so much on myself after a failed cycle, and I already questioned so much, that at least if I do all the things, I can say, okay, I did everything. Like it didn't work this time, but I know I did everything. And it's like one less thing for me to worry about, having to overcome the like guilt of what should I have done different.
Yeah.
So I just take the 3 months to get because, it takes 3 months for your cells to like regenerate and stuff. So I'm doing acupuncture once or twice a week. I found a prenatal chiropractor. I just had my first session with her today. She's amazing. So we had like a couple hours, and she did x-rays and scanned my back and saw some areas of actually that she said were problematic. And they're the areas that are supplying blood to the ovaries. So that was an interesting thing that I had never considered. So I'll be seeing her regularly. All the supplements, obviously. I also cut the Saluma Pro for the light therapy. So I've been doing that daily. I've been using the acupressure mat daily. So trying to do everything that I can to just ensure that I can at least say after the next cycle, like I gave it my all, and then it's up to God, like whatever happens, whatever next. I'm really trying to also do ovarian PRP, so platelet injections. I have an appointment right now. They don't have another opening until the end of January just for a consult. So I'm not sure when in this process that will come through, but that's kind of where we're at. It's been hard. It's hard on our marriage. It's hard on life. It's like, I want to be happy and joyful and carefree and enjoy this time without kids, but also it's like a second job, and I have to pay attention to what I'm eating and what I'm doing and my supplements and my sleep. And like, there's just a lot that goes into it. So like, the community is helpful, and just knowing that something has worked is helpful. I think it makes it a little bit less heavy. Gives me a little bit more hope. So that's my story.
I think the not being able to relax is definitely a big one, probably, because I mean, I've been on a few different sort of diets before, and you do kind of, it becomes your life, because you're just so sort of regimented of like, oh, I know I can't eat that. No, I need to eat more of this. I need to eat less of that. I can't have that. I can't even think about that. Like thinking about it's bad. Like, so I get what you mean. It's it does become a second job. It becomes it's just this thing that takes over your whole life. And yeah, it would impact you both. Yeah.
I stopped tracking. I think the first time I did that quality, I was way more like tracking everything. And I think that stressed me out more. And now because I did it before, I kind of know more or less like how to get the protein in. I keep the snacks around that I can just travel with. Like I try to, it takes more planning and preparation. But I'm trying to be a little bit more lenient with myself. And it's not always going to be completely perfect, and that's okay. I think before I was a lot more strict, and that creates a little bit more stress than I think benefit. I also had like, a glass of wine on Thanksgiving, and I feel fine about that because in general, I'm not drinking it at all. Or, I had a little bit of coffee one day. But so I feel like letting myself have, I've been eating some like a little chunk of like clean chocolate. So it's not like, it's made with like dates or whatever, coconut sugar, but it's not like totally perfect, but it's not as crazy extreme as I was before. So letting myself a little bit off the hook. And I think that helps a lot with the being able to just relax a little. Also, I travel. That's my like kind of where I get my breaks, is like when I can travel and be kind of in my world of just out of the here. It's like IVF all the time. And then when I'm gone, I can just kind of be me a little bit. So that's definitely the way I manage to kind of escape the stress for a little bit. For me, there's a sadness to like, we've never had the naive period, right? Usually you're blissfully unaware that you have infertility issues for a little while. And so there's just the fun and like, we're just trying to have a baby. And, I've seen it in the movies my whole life and thought about it my whole life. And then we actually we've never had that. So for me, it's an IVF cycle and it's an off month, but it's not like we're just going to try naturally month, because we know that won't go anywhere. So that's kind of our situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that must be, sort of confronting, because obviously, yeah, a lot of the movies are all like, yeah, you just do the thing and there's a baby. And that's something that stresses me out, because I'm just like, well, that doesn't always happen.
So this is funny. When I first, in April, when I had the really good results with the 12 eggs and I had the 3 embryos and I was like so sure we'd get normal embryos, we were in Austin, Texas, which is like a very fun like city and a lot of young people. And there's this like one strip of like bars with like nightlife. And I had been with Sam, and then I was switching to be with a friend for the weekend. She was there for work from Germany. And I was going to meet her with some colleagues. And I had just gotten the news the night before that none of our embryos made it. And I was looking for her. I'm on my own. I'm in this club. I'm older. There's probably like a bunch of like younger 20-something-year-old people just like dancing and having like a great carefree time. And I had this moment where I was like, wanted to just stop all these women and be like, stop it. You don't know. You don't have time. Like, you're wasting your time. It was just this crazy, like, I need to leave. This is not a good environment for me to be in. But yeah, you realize like, no one told us, like, we didn't know when we were younger. If anything, for me, I'm the oldest of 4. My mother got pregnant 5 times. And my whole life basically was like, oh, you're gonna, she got pregnant on birth control like twice. And so since I was younger, have just been hearing how super crazy fertile we are. And I thought I could get pregnant by like sneezing, right? Like someone sneezed on me and I'd get pregnant. Like I've been that paranoid about being pregnant my whole life that this was never even a like thing in my head that I would have imagined going through, because I was just always so cautious for my whole life. That was just the thing I was the most paranoid about. And now I laugh because I'm like, oh yeah, no, it's not the way they portray it to be. And then when I explain to you how incredibly challenging it is for that pregnancy to even happen, you realize like how many miracle babies there actually are, because it's such a rare thing for all the things that have to align for a baby to actually be made.
I saw one of your posts. You said sometimes saying faith over fear is easy to say it, but it's not easy to do it. Like no matter how faithful you are and how much you pray, like sometimes that fear just doesn't go away. It's just there, just niggling at you, and you're just like, I just got to keep moving somehow.
Yeah, I'm learning too that fear is often like written into our DNA in a way where there's just these pathways of the brain that kind of go down these routes. So if you're anyone that has like me, that has any sort of trauma or past or grown up in an environment where there was a lot of fear or anxiety or just chaos or whatever was happening, it is very hard Like I can know the things to do that will be healthy. I can know that God is good. I can know that I should cling to faith and not be anxious about anything. Like I know the words, but changing those brain pathways is much harder than just saying the words. So it's like I can desire that. That's my goal. But I realized how much work it really takes. I think that's also what this process has done, right? It's brought me to mindfulness in a way, and prayer and meditation. Like there's just a lot more that goes into the managing yourself through the process, and being able to still see the good and practice gratitude and find other outlets. So it's not just IVF all the time, right? It's not just all about trying to make children, but what are the things? And like I try to walk as much outside in nature as possible. That's definitely something since February that I've added in, because I noticed just how important it is for my mental health and to keep me grounded and connected to God. That's where it's like, okay, this seems like the biggest thing in the world because it's the biggest thing in my world. And when I'm sitting in my apartment, my world is surrounding me. And so I have noticed in general with it, whatever trial it was, I lost my brother passed away 6 or so years ago. And that's something that kind of came to me at that point in time, where like being out in nature helped me get more grounded and just see how big the world really was, and how like my problems and my stuff is actually like very small in comparison. But it's doing my own space.
Yeah.
My own space, surrounded by my stuff and my issues and my like that's just kind of like the main takes center stage. But when I'm able to go out and be in nature and be more connected to creation and what's happening around me, and the bigger picture, and the things no control over making, like mountains and lakes and oceans, and just it helps me feel more at peace and helps me let go of some of that control. I think where the fear we try to control, especially as women, we try to control out of fear.
Yeah.
Fear of the unknown, fear of disappointment, fear of the negative outcomes that can happen, fear that our dreams aren't going to come true. And so we have this we want to do stuff. We want to take everything into our own hands because we feel like that will make us more confident, feel better, and that will lead to a better result. And I think that's where the trust in God piece comes in, which is something that I pray for daily, because I don't think it comes naturally to a lot of us. And depending on the faith that you grew up in, it can be even harder. It's again, something you might hear in church on a Sunday, but like learning how to have it become part of your psyche and part of how you operate. It's a thing I think takes probably years to master, but trying.
Yeah, it does feel that way, and it feels like you have to work to kind of stay connected. And you're right, like you do, like when you're stuck in your world, you kind of just, let it all just cover you, and you kind of end up like claustrophobic in your own, reality. There's so many of us who are going through this, and maybe that's why stories help so much. Like that's what's helped me a lot, like listening to women, because it's just like that whole big picture of, all these women are suffering, like so many of us are going through this. I'm not alone. We're all doing this at the same time. But then there's also a load of women who aren't doing this, who are naive and enjoying it and having this beautiful, I had a baby and it's all beautiful and lovely and roses. And
yeah, I definitely have having a hard time with the news from others. So it's easier for me when like fellow infertility warriors get pregnant, because then I'm like, great, awesome. You fought the battle and it worked, and we need stories like that. But I have a harder time just feeling disappointed or, sadness for myself when there's just like the many spontaneous pregnancies where it's like, I just started trying and I got pregnant. We had three pregnancy announcements this past week.
Oh wow.
And it was Thanksgiving, the holiday too, which comes already with a lot of different announcements. So that was particularly challenging. Again, also because we can't even try. And so that's just something that every time that happens, I'm reminded of, like, that's not even something I can hope for because it's just impossible. And so it's definitely, I think, that's also why we need the community, because we can feel like jerks when we feel those things. Like we can, my husband doesn't necessarily understand it, or people who haven't gone through it don't understand why we would feel that way. Like, you should be happy for so and so, and we are, but we're also sad.
Yeah.
I think for us,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Um,
that's definitely
yeah.
thing. I was in Prague. I was at a conference in November though, which was helpful because some of the people there one of my good friends were like Ukrainian refugees. So then again, life and perspective, I'm like, okay, so I'm going through some stuff right now, but there are a lot of people going through a lot of things, and being able to support each other. And it's not that, you can compare the things, but just realizing getting outside of just our world, I think, is important too. And just being connected to what's happening around us puts life in perspective and makes us also more grateful for the things we do have. So it's the Thanksgiving gratitude month in the States. So, gratitude has definitely been a topic a lot, but it's a good one because I think that helps us to, with the mental health piece, practicing gratitude and just recognizing the good and giving perspective on like what other people are going through. And there are a lot of challenges. I also think isolate in the IVF world, like we just feel like people don't get us and people say the wrong thing. And so we can just tend to not want to talk to people. But I also just came from, it was actually a church event with other women, but two of the women in my like little group that I was in, they were sharing, just they were both having really rough days, and they were totally different, and they're at different stages of life. Each of them have 3 teenage boys. And it's good for me to be even around parent, because their struggles often have to do with their kids, and but they were having a really, really hard time. And so it helps the perspective of, it's not just to have the babies, but like life is difficult and will come with challenges, and it puts things a little bit in perspective. It's not just all, just like marriage is actually really hard, but in the movies people make it all look like it's all this like great fairy tale. But I don't think we're honest enough with people who aren't in that stage, that like it's actually hard. I think we glorify things until we get into it, and then with other people who are also in it, we can be honest, but we're not honest enough like before that. So like when you're trying to have a baby, it's like, okay, we know it's hard, but to see a mom who has like teenagers, just to talk and realize like she's through a lot, and this is just part of life, and this is my part. This is where I'm at now. Like realness, when you can be open and vulnerable with other people, like when you are not isolating yourself, when you step outside to be more in community, where you can see like other people with children, like they are going through stuff, and then we can be there for each other in what we're going through, instead of feeling like we need to like isolate from the hurt or the insensitive comments or the triggers. And I totally get that for some people where they're at and they need to do that. But I have found for me, when I do isolate, I usually am not helping myself at all. Usually it doesn't lead to anything good. I'm just going down into some kind of pit, and that's not really going to be that I'm going to have to crawl out of. But once I'm able to like be in community and share with the people around me about what's really going on, often they'll open up too, and they're going through different stuff, but not always the easiest stuff either. So
are you moving into insemination?
So yeah, our goal is to bank more embryos. We had hoped, obviously, that we'd get something from this last round. That's the other thing. Timelines are out the window, right? Like you can't, it stinks to not plan anything. Like life seems always like it's on hold, or things are so up in the air because it depends on when my period's coming and what's happening. And so I had thought we'd do a cycle in October and in December, and then maybe by like February, we'd have enough to like transfer or something. And now we're needing to do more cycles. So I've kind of also realized to let go of the timeline and trust God with that, which is not great for someone who wants to like plan and control things. But if that's IVF, like months just go by, right? Like where does the time go? So insurance wise, we can have, I think, 4 embryos frozen before they make us transfer. I might try to petition the insurance company because of the diminished ovarian reserve and like my husband's situation, to see if they'd let us have more frozen, more banked. Because the thought is, with my my situation, if I was to get pregnant with our like one embryo, then try to do IVF like a year and a half or 2 years from now, it's that much harder because my eggs are that much older. And so it would be that much harder to actually get the embryos. We want to have all the embryos I think we'll need. And again, I've never tried to get pregnant, so we don't really know how transfer is going to work. And so we're going to see. But depending on what insurance says, the minimum we're hoping is to get like 4 normal embryos and then start trying. So that's where we're at the moment. Unless insurance approves it and lets us freeze more, that would be great. It would be cool. Of course, you always want more because you're just nervous, and enough from being in the community that like just because we have embryos doesn't mean that we have babies. Yeah. And so I always wanted a big family. I wanted 4. I always wanted 4. My husband does not. And so now, of course, it's also like you realize when you're in the infertility community too, it's like whatever you wanted doesn't matter. At a certain point, you're like, whatever, just give me children. We'll see where things come out. But that's the current plan, is to continue banking. So I can't even predict what's going to happen from one cycle to another. But for sure, we're doing a cycle in February. I bet we'd probably end up doing one in April too, and then we'll see where we come up. Unless we get a miracle in February and get like all of our embryos, and we don't have to do it again. But I think that every month, every cycle. So it's like you want to, that's the other thing too, right? You want to be realistic, so you're prepared for the bad news, but you have faith that the miracles can happen. And I've always struggled with like the balance there.
I don't know if your husband's comfortable with you saying anything, but how has he coped with it if he is comfortable?
He's in the other room. He probably is hearing this entire thing. He's very open, so I think that's fine. I think it's hard for him, right? There's a feeling of like, this is on me, right? Like we can't try naturally because of him, not because of me, right? Like we both have our stuff. So I have the lower egg reserve for sure. And he has, his issue. And so I definitely think that he feels that like, cause there's also not much he can do. His sperm is frozen. And so there's not like he can, when men and women are trying, men are also often like needing to be on the diets and doing the things to make sure their sperm is as healthy as can be. And you just keep doing that cycle after cycle. And in our situation, he's kind of done. And so I think there's that, like, there's just not much he can do. So I think that's definitely hard. I also think at least there was a time where he wasn't even sure. And that was really stressful, right? Like, can I have my own biological children? That was really important to him. Back then, when we talked about adoption, his fear, which I think a lot of men fear, like, can I love something that's not biologically mine? I think he's since come a little bit further away from that. And because we have the sperm, I don't think we'll have to go that route necessarily, but I definitely think that was a big fear, right? Like, can I have my own children? Which I've felt too, like, are my eggs going to work? Can I have children that are biologically mine? Yeah. And in every stage of this, it's all like loss and grief.
Yeah.
Right. You're grieving the natural. So it's just step by step going through the grief, having some sort of loss associated to what you hoped would happen or what you thought would happen or the way it's supposed to be. And then accepting kind of where things are. So I know he definitely, I think he feels some guilt and some just like, as you would, like, just wishing it was different. I think we both wish that. But he's also supportive, and he gives me all my shots and comes to me at all my appointments. That's also something that I wanted to establish earlier on, because I realized I do these fertility support group calls, and like a lot of women, we can end up resenting our husbands a little bit, right? Like, because we have to do all this stuff, and it seems like they don't have to do too much, and so it can be really frustrating. Like, and that's normal. And then talking to other women, a lot of us feel that way. And one of the ways that I tried to mitigate that a little bit from the beginning is that we do stuff together. So I still have to manage all the injections, and I have to take all the injection and go through all the side effects and do the surgical procedures and all that stuff, obviously. But he at least has to give me the injections. And so then he has to be around for that. He has to be present. Like, I can do them on my own, but like, that's a way he can participate. Or help me mix them, and then we go to the appointments together. It's like, if I have to drive an hour into Boston and wake up early, which is not fun, especially in traffic and stuff, at least going together, it's our thing, not just my thing that I have to like endure by myself. It's, us doing it together. And so I think that's been helpful.
Please note that all speakers, including experts and professionals, express information, views, and opinions that should not be used to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any medical conditions. If you have a medical issue, please consult a qualified professional. Speakers voice their own views, opinions, and conclusions, and they may not reflect the views, opinions, and conclusions of other speakers. Ella Rose, The Joy of Sunflowers, and its sponsors may not endorse all or any of the views, opinions, or conclusions expressed.